The icy lash of the November wind against the towering glass facade of Thorne Industries was a familiar sensation, almost a comfort in its predictability. It mirrored the permafrost that had encased Ethan Thorne's heart for precisely 2 years, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Not that he was counting. Not consciously, anyway. From the hushed sanctuary of his penthouse office, 80 floors above the ceaseless thrum of the city, the metropolis unfurled like a carpet woven with diamonds and distant promises. It was a kingdom he commanded, a testament to his relentless drive, yet tonight, its glittering allure felt utterly sterile. He surveyed the panorama, not with pride, but with a weary detachment, the skyline reflecting the stark emptiness within him. The tumbler of expensive, single malt felt heavy in his hand, its warmth failing spectacularly to penetrate the chill that resided deep in his bones, a chill that had little to do with the season. 2 years, a chasm of time separating the man he was now, formidable, focused, ferociously successful, and utterly alone, from the man he had been. The man whose world had revolved around Clara Dubois. Clara, her name, was a phantom limb, an ache where something vital used to be. She had been sunlight after a long winter, the vibrant pulse beneath the cool veneer of his corporate world. He remembered their first meeting with painful clarity, a charity gala he'd almost skipped, her infectious laugh cutting through the pretentious murmur of the crowd, her sapphire eyes holding a spark of genuine warmth that had drawn him inexplicably closer. Theirs had been a whirlwind romance, intense and consuming, a collision of worlds that felt like destiny. He, the self-made billionaire haunted by a demanding past. She, the brilliant art historian with a passion for life that softened his rough edges. He'd let his guard down, allowed himself to believe in a future that wasn't dictated solely by balance sheets and hostile takeovers. He'd given her his trust, a commodity far rarer and more valuable to him than any stock option. And she had taken that trust, shattered it into a million irreparable pieces, and walked away, leaving him reeling in the wreckage. The betrayal remained an open wound, perpetually weeping beneath the scar tissue of anger and cynicism he'd cultivated since. The memory wasn't just a single moment, but a sickening montage. The urgent, hushed summons from Marcus Vance, his then-trusted head of security, the sterile conference room, the damning evidence laid out with cold precision. Fabricated emails, yes, but so cleverly done, mimicking her phrasing, her cadence. Encrypted communications log showing data transfers to servers linked directly to Julian Vance, his most despised competitor. Bank statements, meticulously forged, showing substantial deposits into an offshore account under a variation of her name, coinciding perfectly with leaks of sensitive R&D data that had cost Thorne Industries millions and jeopardized a crucial merger. Marcus had presented it all with feigned reluctance, emphasizing how he'd hoped it wasn't true, how he'd double and triple-checked. It had been a masterclass in manipulation, playing perfectly on Ethan's deepest fears of vulnerability. And then, the coup de grace, the image seared into his brain with the permanence of a branding iron, driving himself, half-mad with disbelief and a desperate, sickening hope that it was all a terrible mistake, to Julian Vance's opulent penthouse. Finding her there, not dragged, not coerced, not tearful, but standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, his city, a flute of champagne held delicately in her hand, engaged in quiet conversation with Vance himself. She hadn't even looked surprised to see him, just resigned. Or perhaps, he'd thought with a fresh surge of bile, satisfied. The look in her eyes wasn't guilt. It was a chilling emptiness, a disconnect that severed the last thread of his hope. He hadn't stayed to hear explanations he was certain would be lies. He had turned, walked away, the sound of his own heart shattering, echoing louder than the closing elevator doors. He'd channeled the ensuing maelstrom of pain and fury into the only thing he had left, his company. Thorne Industries became his weapon, his shield, his entire existence. He worked with a ferocity that bordered on self-destruction, acquiring rivals, launching aggressive market strategies, decimating competitors with surgical precision. Julian Vance's company, once a significant threat, was now gasping for air, bleeding capital, largely due to Ethan's relentless, vindictive pressure. Ethan told himself it was justice, a necessary rebalancing of the scales. He dined alone in the finest restaurants, attended functions surrounded by people, but connected to none, his calculated charm a well-honed defense mechanism. Yet in the dead of night, when the city lights blurred outside his window and the silence of his vast apartment pressed in, the ghost of Clara, her laugh, the scent of her perfume, the way she used to look at him as if he were the only man in the world, would return, mocking the hollowness of his empire. The sharp, insistent ring of his private line, the direct, encrypted link to Marcus Thorne, the current head of security, a different Marcus, meticulously vetted after the last one's spectacular betrayal, cut through the oppressive quiet. Ethan rarely received calls on this line unless it was critical. "Thorne," he answered, his voice clipped, devoid of inflection. "Mr. Thorne, the new Marcus Cole," began, his tone professionally neutral but underscored with an unusual note of caution. "Apologies for the late hour. We have an update from the ongoing passive surveillance on associates of the now-defunct Vance Corporation. Standard procedure, tracking residual financial threads." Ethan straightened slightly, a flicker of interest piercing his apathy. Any news related to Vance was potentially useful leverage. "Go on." "It concerns Clara Dubois." The name hit him like an unexpected physical blow, stealing his breath for a fraction of a second. He tightened his grip on the tumbler, knuckles whitening. 2 years, and it still had the power to incapacitate him. "What about her?" he managed, keeping his voice level through sheer force of will. He expected to hear she'd landed on her feet, perhaps attached herself to another wealthy patron. Now that Vance was sinking. "Intelligence places her in Oakhaven, small coastal town, approximately 3 hours north of the city." Cole paused, letting the information sink in. "Sir, the lifestyle doesn't match previous projections. She's residing in a rented cottage, minimal local interaction, living well below the radar. Significantly below the means suggested by the fund she supposedly acquired from Vance." Ethan's lip curled in sneer. So the money ran out, or Vance finally tired of her. Oakhaven. The name itself sounded bleak, insignificant. A fitting exile, perhaps. Good. Let her fade into obscurity. "Why is this update critical, Marcus?" "Sir, there's more." Cole's hesitation was slight but noticeable. "Ms. Dubois is not alone. Field observation confirms she has a child with her. A male infant. A child." The information landed strangely, creating ripples in the stagnant pool of his bitterness. So, she hadn't wasted time. Had the child with Vance? The timeline would be tight, but possible. A fresh, acrid wave of resentment washed over him. He imagined Vance, smug and victorious, not only stealing his company's secrets via Clara, but leaving her pregnant before inevitably discarding her. It fit the narrative he'd clung to. A predictable development. Continue. "The child's estimated age is between 18 and 24 months, based on observation." Cole paused again, longer this time. "Sir, preliminary local reconnaissance, very discreet inquiries, indicates the child is referred to by Ms. Dubois and occasionally by neighbors by name." Another pause, heavy with implication. "The name is Ethan." Silence. Utter, profound silence. The tumbler slipped from Ethan's suddenly nerveless fingers, crashing onto the imported Italian marble floor. The sound echoed the violent, instantaneous implosion of the icy fortress around his heart. "Ethan?" It reverberated in the cavern of his chest. No, it was impossible. A grotesque coincidence. A final, twisted stab from the woman who had gutted his life? Or worse? He mentally calculated backwards. 18 to 24 months. 2 years since she vanished. The dates aligned with horrifying precision. Could it be? Fury, raw and potent, surged, battling a sudden, terrifying wave of vulnerability, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. He had to know. He had to see it, confront it, extinguish this insane possibility before it consumed him. "The helicopter," he commanded, his voice a low growl, shedding its carefully constructed apathy like a snake sheds skin. "Prepare it immediately. Destination, Oak Haven. And Marcus?" "Sir, absolute blackout on this. No digital trail, no flight plan filed unless absolutely necessary and anonymized. No one knows I'm going there. Is that understood?" "Understood, Mr. Thorne. Wheels up in 30 minutes." The northward flight in the sleek, anonymous Augusta Westland was a torment. Ethan stared unseeing at the dark landscape rushing past below, his mind a battlefield. Images assaulted him. Clara laughing, her head thrown back, sunlight catching the gold in her hair. Clara curled beside him, tracing patterns on his chest in the pre-dawn light. Clara standing beside Julian Vance, champagne flute in hand, her eyes empty. And now, a new image inserting itself with terrifying insistence. A faceless child bearing his name. Was it a cruel taunt? A desperate plea? Or the unthinkable truth? If the child was his, why the betrayal? Why hadn't she told him? Why hide him away in squalor? The questions hammered at him, each one chipping away at the bedrock of certainty he'd built his life upon for 2 years. The betrayal had been absolute, the evidence irrefutable. Hadn't it? For the first time, a sliver of doubt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced his conviction. Oak Haven materialized out of the coastal mist, a cluster of salt-bleached houses huddled against the relentless gray expanse of the Atlantic. It felt like the edge of the world, forgotten and melancholic. It suited the narrative of a discarded mistress, yet something felt dissonant. Marcus Cole had provided the address via secure, encrypted message. Gulls End Cottage, perched precariously on a wind-battered cliff overlooking a churning, slate-gray sea. Ethan landed the helicopter discreetly in a secluded clearing a mile away, disguised by topography and low cloud cover, and drove the final stretch in an unremarkable rental sedan he'd arranged. The cottage, when he found it, looked even more desolate than he'd imagined. Peeling paint, shutters hanging askew, a garden choked with weeds and defiant coastal grasses. It screamed poverty, or at least profound neglect. It didn't fit the image of a woman who'd supposedly sold her soul for a fortune. He parked down the lane, hidden by a bend, the collar of his expensive cashmere coat pulled high against the biting wind, a futile gesture against the storm brewing inside him. His heart pounded a heavy, erratic rhythm against his ribs, a traitorous drumbeat of anticipation and dread. He approached cautiously, keeping to the overgrown verge. Through a salt-grimed window, obscured by cheap, faded curtains, he saw movement. Then, her silhouette. Clara, even in profile, even diminished by circumstance, it was unmistakably her. She looked worn, thinner than he remembered, lines of exhaustion and worry etched around her eyes and mouth, visible even from this distance. She was dressed in practical, faded jeans and a thick, shapeless woolen sweater, her glorious auburn hair tied back simply. A universe away from the effortlessly elegant woman who had captivated him. She was kneeling on the floor, her back mostly to him, focused on something within a small, makeshift playpen constructed from driftwood and netting. She murmured something soft, indistinct. Then, she turned, a smile briefly illuminating her tired features, a ghost of the radiance he remembered, and she lifted a small child into her arms. Ethan froze, his breath catching somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The boy. He had a riot of dark, unruly curls, startlingly similar to photos Ethan's own mother kept of him as a toddler. And as Clara shifted, turning the child slightly towards the window, the boy's gaze, wide and startlingly alert, seemed to meet his across the distance. The eyes, deep-set, intense gray, fringed with thick dark lashes. Thorn eyes. Ethan felt a dizzying lurch, as if the very ground beneath his feet had become unstable. Then, carried faintly on the wind, he heard Clara's voice, clearer now, imbued with a tenderness that lanced through his anger. "There we go, my little Ethan. All clean. Ready for a story before nap time? My little Ethan." The world tilted, colors blurring at the edges of his vision. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a twisted game. It was real. This child, this small boy with his own stubborn hair and his father's eyes, was his son. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping. Betrayal? How? The carefully constructed narrative of her greed and treachery fractured, splintering under the undeniable weight of this truth. Selling secrets, aligning with his enemy, yet secretly carrying his child, raising him in this desolate place, giving him his name? The pieces didn't fit. The anger he'd nurtured for 2 years felt suddenly hollow, displaced by a profound, terrifying confusion. He needed answers. Now, abandoning caution, fueled by an urgency that eclipsed his long-held bitterness, he strode down the path, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. He reached the peeling blue door and knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the sea-laced quiet. Inside, he heard a sharp, startled gasp, then hesitant footsteps. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing Clara's face, pale and strained. Her sapphire eyes widened first in disbelief, then in something that looked terrifyingly like raw panic. Her hand instinctively tightened on the small body perched on her hip, pulling the child closer, as if to shield him. Little Ethan, sensing his mother's fear, looked towards the imposing figure at the door with wide, uncertain eyes. "Ethan," she breathed, his name a fragile puff of air, barely audible above the wind. "Clara," he replied, his voice rougher, raspier than he intended. His gaze was locked on the child, drinking in the small details, the shape of his mouth, the determined set of his chin. His son. He forced his eyes back to Clara's face. "We need to talk." Her eyes darted nervously past him, scanning the empty lane, before returning to his face, the fear intensifying. She tried to close the door, a small, desperate movement. "There's nothing left to say, Ethan." He reacted instinctively, planting his hand flat against the weathered wood, easily stopping her. The contact, skin against wood against her resistance, sent an unwanted jolt through him. "Don't," he warned, the old, familiar anger flaring briefly before being swamped by the overwhelming need for truth. "Don't you dare shut me out again. Not now." He gestured, his hand trembling slightly, towards the boy clinging to her. "Is he?" The question felt monumental, lodged in his throat. "Clara, is he mine?" Tears instantly flooded her eyes, turning the sapphire irises into shimmering pools of anguish. She didn't try to deny it. She looked trapped, cornered, utterly vulnerable. "Yes," she whispered, the single syllable cracking, hanging heavy and explosive in the charged air between them. "What?" The word was torn from him, raw with 2 years of festering pain and bewildered hurt. "Why didn't you tell me? Why go through with the betrayal? Why take Vance's money, ruin everything we had, only to disappear and hide away herewith with my son?" The accusation felt flimsy even as he voiced it, colliding with the reality of her terrified eyes and the impoverished surroundings. Clara flinched as if he'd struck her physically. She shook her head frantically, tears finally spilling, carving desperate tracks down her pale cheeks. "No, Ethan, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. I swear to you, I never betrayed you. Not really. Not how you think." "Then make me understand," he demanded, stepping closer instinctively, breaching the threshold, his presence filling the small entryway. The sheer force of his need for answers radiated from him. "Tell me what really happened. Tell me why I found irrefutable proof you were selling company secrets. Tell me why I saw you celebrating with Julian Vance." "I can't," she sobbed, clutching their son so tightly the boy began to cry, frightened by the escalating tension and the loud voices. "Not out here. It's not safe. He might find out. Not safe." Ethan seized on the word, suspicion warring with a growing sense of unease. Was this another manipulation? A new lie to cover the old ones? "What are you talking about? Who might find out? Vance?" She shook her head vehemently, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks. "No, not Vance. Someone else, someone much worse." "Please, Ethan," she begged, her eyes wide with genuine terror, locking onto his with desperate appeal. You have to leave. Now. If he finds out you're here, that you found us, he'll kill us all. Please just go. For little Ethan's sake, she whispered, her voice cracking, nodding towards their terrified child. Ethan stared at her, truly seeing her fear for the first time, unfiltered by his own pain. It wasn't the fear of a guilty party caught in a lie. It was the primal terror of prey, sensing a predator nearby. He looked from her desperate face to the crying child in her arms, his son. An unfamiliar, fiercely protective instinct roared to life within him, consuming the remnants of his bitterness like wildfire. Something was fundamentally wrong with the picture he'd held onto for 2 years. Clara wasn't a traitor living off ill-gotten gains. She was a terrified mother hiding with his child. I'm not leaving you, he stated, the words imbued with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, surprising even himself. Not until I have the truth, the whole truth, and I'm never leaving my son. With quiet finality, he pushed the door fully open, stepped inside the small, chilly cottage, and firmly shut the door behind them, sealing them in together against the wind, against her fear, and against whatever danger lurked outside. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence. The interior of the cottage was even more Spartan than the outside suggested. It was spotlessly clean, but the furniture was minimal, worn, clearly secondhand. Handmade curtains, slightly faded, framed the windows. A tiny kitchenette occupied one corner, sparsely equipped. The only decorations were numerous, slightly blurry photos of the baby. Their baby, taped to the ancient refrigerator door, propped against a stack of worn paperbacks on a small bookshelf, tucked into the frame of a cracked mirror. There were no vestiges of Clara's former life, no hint of luxury, no sign whatsoever of the substantial sum she had supposedly received from Vance. It was the dwelling of someone barely scraping by, someone focused solely on survival, and the child who was now watching him with wide, wary eyes from the safety of his mother's arms. Clara moved automatically, her body remembering the familiar rhythms of motherhood, even as her mind grappled with his sudden reappearance. She gently bounced and murmured to little Ethan, her touch soothing, until his cries subsided into quiet, watchful hiccups. Her gaze, however, remained fixed on the man who had just shattered the fragile piece of her hidden existence. The air in the small room vibrated with unspoken history, unresolved anguish, and a palpable, creeping sense of menace. All right, Clara, Ethan said, his voice dropping, losing its harsh edge, replaced by an intense, focused quiet that was perhaps even more intimidating. He deliberately chose the most stable-looking piece of furniture, a rickety wooden chair by a small table, and sat, his large frame seeming to dwarf the humble surroundings. No more evasions. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Why? Why let me believe the worst? Why protect Vance? Why run? Clara sank onto the edge of a threadbare sofa, pulling their son onto her lap, holding him like a small, warm anchor in the storm of her emotions. She took a deep, shuddering breath, gathering herself. Because I had no choice, she began, her voice barely a whisper, fragile as sea foam. If I wanted you to live. Ethan stared, motionless, processing the words. Protect him? By orchestrating her own downfall? It defied logic, yet the raw fear in her eyes lent it a terrifying credibility. Protect me? How? By collaborating with Julian Vance? By giving him the information that almost destroyed the Axia merger? I never gave him anything willingly, she insisted, lifting her chin, meeting his gaze directly now. Her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a spark of the defiance he remembered. Julian was a pawn, Ethan, a useful idiot in someone else's game. He helped frame me, yes, but he wasn't the architect. He was working under duress, for someone far more dangerous, someone who wanted you hurt. A cold knot formed in Ethan's stomach. Who? Who was behind it? Clara hesitated, glancing towards the bolted door as if expecting it to burst open. She lowered her voice further, leaning forward conspiratorially. Marcus, she whispered, the name hanging in the air like poison gas. Ethan recoiled as if physically struck. Marcus? My Marcus? Marcus Vance? Head of security? That's insane, Clara. He was with my father. He practically raised me after Dad died. He's the most loyal man I know. He showed me the evidence against you. Oh, he's loyal, Ethan, Clara said, a bitter, knowing sadness in her voice that chilled him more than her fear. He's loyal to the highest bidder. And 2 years ago, someone made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Someone with deep pockets and a deeper grudge against you. They wanted you weakened, vulnerable, perhaps even eliminated eventually. Marcus saw his chance, a massive payout and leverage over a powerful enemy. The world seemed to tilt again. Marcus Vance? His father's right-hand man? The man who had been a steady, almost paternal presence throughout his life? The man who had presented the evidence against Clara with such convincing sorrow and righteous anger? It felt like a betrayal on an entirely different, more fundamental level. Oh, how do you know this? Why would he frame you? Because I found something I wasn't supposed to see, Clara explained, her voice gaining a frantic edge as the memories resurfaced. I was working late in your office library one night, waiting for you to finish a conference call. Marcus had left his company tablet behind. A notification popped up, encrypted message alert. Curiosity. I don't know why, maybe a gut feeling. I managed to guess his passcode. It was ridiculously simple, his daughter's birthday. And I saw them, Ethan. Encrypted messages back and forth with an untraceable account. Talking about vulnerabilities in Thorn Industries network. Specifically mentioning the Axiom deal negotiations, referencing payments routed through multiple shell corporations, mentioning Vance as the delivery system. It didn't make sense, but it felt dirty, wrong. I screenshotted a few fragments, foolishly, thinking I needed proof before confronting him. She hugged herself, shivering despite the warmth of the child on her lap. I confronted him the next day, privately. I showed him the screenshots. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Instead, her voice trembled. He didn't deny it. He laughed. Then he turned cold. He told me I had no idea who I was messing with. He said his backer was immensely powerful, untouchable, with resources that could make anyone disappear. He threatened me, Ethan, explicitly. He said if I breathed a word of this to you, he would unleash hell. He showed me surveillance photos of you. Long-lens shots at your apartment, leaving the office, even one from inside your car. He detailed your routines, your security protocols he designed. He told me how easily you could have an accident, a car crash, a mugging gone wrong. He said his backer wouldn't hesitate, and he made it crystal clear that if anything happened to you, he would ensure all evidence pointed directly at me, the jealous lover, the corporate spy. Ethan felt nauseous. The calculated cruelty of it, the intimate knowledge used as a weapon by someone he'd trusted implicitly. He remembered Marcus's solicitous concern after Clara left, his recommendations to tighten security, his subtle steering of Ethan's grief towards anger and vengeance directed solely at Clara and Vance. It had all been theater, a grotesque puppet show with him and Clara as the tragic figures, and Marcus pulling the strings. But he offered me a way out, Clara continued, her voice flat, devoid of emotion now, as if recounting someone else's story. His backer didn't necessarily want you dead, not yet anyway. Weakened, distracted, emotionally compromised, that served their purpose for the time being. Marcus said if I agreed to be the scapegoat, took the fall for the leaks he had orchestrated, he would ensure the damage was contained. He would plant the evidence, the emails he faked using snippets of my real correspondence, the bank records linked to an account he opened and funded initially, the staged meeting logs with Vance. He even arranged that final scene at Vance's penthouse. Vance was terrified of Marcus and his backer too. He agreed to play his part in exchange for protection or perhaps a share of the potential spoils if Thorn Industries faltered. And the money? Ethan asked, the word tasting like ash. The money Vance supposedly paid you? Marcus forced me to take it, Clara said, looking away, shame coloring her cheeks. He had Vance transfer a significant sum to the account Marcus controlled but had put in my name. It was part of the proof against me. Marcus gave me a portion in cash, telling me to use it to disappear, start a new life, and never, ever contact you again. He said it was the price of your safety. If I refused the money, if I tried to warn you, if I ever surfaced, he swore he would activate his contingency plan. Your life, Ethan. That was the deal. My silence, my disgrace, in exchange for you breathing. Ethan closed his eyes, the full weight of her sacrifice crashing down on him. She hadn't betrayed him. She had shielded him in the only way she could, accepting exile and infamy to keep him alive. And he, blinded by his own arrogant pride and manipulated grief, had cursed her for it. The depth of his failure, his monumental error in judgment, was staggering. "Why not later, Clara?" he asked, his voice thick with unshed tears of regret. "After you were clear? Why not find a way?" "I couldn't," she whispered, shaking her head. Marcus wasn't bluffing. He had resources. For the first 6 months, I felt watched. Cars that seemed too familiar, disconnected calls on burner phones. I moved constantly, state to state, cheap motel to cheaper apartment. I never stayed anywhere longer than a few weeks. Then I found out I was pregnant. She looked down at their sleeping son, her hand gently stroking his soft curls, a fierce, protective love radiating from her. Finding out about little Ethan changed everything. It wasn't just my life I was guarding anymore. It was his. What if Marcus, or his backer, found out you had an heir? Another potential weakness? Another person to threaten? I couldn't risk it. The fear became paralyzing. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his directly, pleading for understanding. So I went deeper underground, used the blood money sparingly, just enough to survive, to keep us hidden. I ended up here because it felt remote enough. Anonymous. I thought we might finally be safe. Naming him Ethan, a watery smile touched her lips. It felt like defiance, like keeping a tiny piece of you, of the truth, alive in secret. I prayed you would never find us. Not like this, because finding us meant the danger wasn't over. I never stopped loving you, Ethan. Not for 1 second. Every day, for 2 years, letting you hate me has been a living hell. But I did it because the thought of losing you, truly losing you, was unbearable. The raw, unvarnished truth in her voice, the sheer selflessness of her actions, the lonely, terrified life she had endured, it washed away the last vestiges of Ethan's anger and doubt, leaving only a profound, aching shame and a tidal wave of regret. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool, manipulated by the man he should have suspected first. He reached across the small space separating them, his hand trembling, and gently, reverently, brushed a stray tear from her cheek. Her skin was cool, soft. She leaned into his touch for a fragile second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, before a fresh wave of fear made her pull back sharply. "Ethan, you being here changes everything," she said urgently, her eyes darting towards the window again. "Marcus Cole, your new security chief. He told you where I was, didn't he? He found me." Ethan nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning. He said it was part of tracking Vance's old network. He presented it as routine intelligence. "It's a setup," Clara insisted, her voice rising in panic. "Marcus Vance must have moles inside your current security. Or maybe Cole isn't as clean as you think. Why else lead you directly to me now? They must know you're questioning things. Or maybe Vance, desperate with his company collapsing, finally talked. They wouldn't risk letting me speak to you, letting the truth come out, unless they had a plan to silence us both. Permanently. Oh God, Ethan, we aren't safe." Her words hung in the air, heavy with menace. And as if summoned by her fear, the sound reached them, the low growl of an engine, slowing, then stopping just outside the cottage. Headlights briefly swept across the thin curtains. Clara gasped, scrambling to her feet, clutching little Ethan so tightly he whimpered in his sleep. Ethan was instantly alert, moving silently to the edge of the window, peering through a gap in the curtain. A black, late-model SUV, windows tinted impossibly dark, sat idling in the lane. 2 figures emerged, dressed in dark, functional clothing that screamed professional muscle, not local thugs. They moved with quiet efficiency, scanning the cottage, their postures radiating controlled threat. These weren't debt collectors. These were hunters. "They're here," Clara breathed, backing away from the door, her eyes wide with terror. "It has to be them. Marcus Vance's people. Or worse, Harrison's." "Harrison?" Ethan whispered, turning from the window. "Leonard Harrison? The industrialist?" "I don't know for sure," Clara stammered. But Marcus let the name slip once, when he was drunk and boasting about his powerful backer. "He mentioned Harrison, said he owed your father for ruining him decades ago. I dismissed it then, thought it was drunken rambling, but Leonard Harrison." The name resonated with cold familiarity. An old family rival, financially crippled by Ethan's father in a brutal corporate battle long before Ethan took over. Harrison had disappeared from the public eye years ago, presumed retired or irrelevant. But if he'd been nursing a vendetta all this time, using Marcus Vance, it made a terrifying kind of sense. The scale of the plot, the personal nature of the attack on Clara, the long game, it fit Harrison's reputed ruthlessness. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. A sharp, authoritative knock rattled the flimsy door. Ethan's mind snapped into crisis mode, the years of navigating corporate battlefields instantly translating into tactical assessment. Small cottage, minimal cover, 2 exits, unknown number of hostiles, potentially armed. He looked at Clara, pale and trembling, but holding their son protectively. "Back door," he said curtly, his voice low and commanding. "Where does it lead?" "Kitchen," she replied quickly, her voice shaky. "Opens onto the cliff path. Narrow, exposed." "Give him to me." Ethan held out his arms. For a fraction of a second, Clara hesitated, her instinct to protect her child warring with the necessity of action. Then, with a deep breath, she carefully transferred their sleeping son into his father's arms. The solid, warm weight of the boy against his chest ignited a fierce, primal protectiveness in Ethan unlike anything he had ever experienced. This was his blood, his responsibility. He would die before letting anyone harm him or his mother. The knocking escalated, becoming impatient pounding. "Clara Dubois, open the door. We know you're in there, and we know Thorne is with you." Confirmation. They knew he was there. This wasn't just about silencing Clara anymore. It was about eliminating him too. Marcus Vance, or whoever was running Cole, had played him perfectly, luring him into the trap. "Stay right behind me," Ethan ordered Clara, moving swiftly and silently towards the small kitchen at the back of the cottage. He glanced back as the sound of splintering wood echoed from the front. They were breaking down the door. He eased open the back door, the wind howling, snatching at their clothes, carrying the scent of rain and salt. The cliff path was barely visible in the fading light, a treacherous ribbon snaking along the precipice, with the gray, hungry sea churning far below. Clara shivered violently, pulling her thin cardigan tighter, her eyes fixed on the churning water. "Go," Ethan urged, pushing her gently out into the gale. "Move quickly." They half ran, half stumbled along the uneven path, loose shale skittering underfoot, threatening to send them plunging into the abyss. Little Ethan, jolted awake by the frantic motion and the roar of the wind, started to cry, his small, terrified wails almost lost in the storm's fury. Ethan risked a quick glance over his shoulder. The 2 men burst out of the back of the cottage, spotting them instantly against the dramatic backdrop of the cliffs. One shouted, unintelligible in the wind, and they started after them, moving with unnerving speed and agility. The path became steeper, twisting downwards. Clara cried out, stumbling as her ankle buckled beneath her on a loose rock. Ethan grabbed her arm, hauling her upright without breaking stride. "Keep going, Clara. Don't stop," he yelled over the wind's roar. His pursuers were closing the distance, younger, fitter, unburdened by a child or an injury. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced it down, scanning the path ahead desperately. A sharp bend loomed, hiding what lay beyond, formed by a jagged outcrop of rock thrusting out from the cliff face. maybe, just maybe, around the rocks, he shouted, using his body to shield Clara and the child as they scrambled around the blind turn. And there, almost swallowed by thick, thorny gorse bushes, was a dark fissure in the cliff face, the narrow entrance to a sea cave carved by millennia of Atlantic fury. In there, quickly, he practically pushed Clara towards the opening. She squeezed through the tight gap, vanishing into the blackness within. Ethan followed immediately, holding their son high against his chest, his shoulders scraping against the rough rock. Once inside, he frantically pulled the thorny bushes back across the entrance, hoping the dense foliage would offer some concealment. The cave was cold, damp, echoing with the thunderous crash of waves just outside its mouth. Water dripped rhythmically from the unseen ceiling, and the air hung thick with the smell of brine, seaweed, and wet stone. It offered temporary refuge, but it was undeniably a trap, a dead end with the sea as its back wall. They huddled together in the near-total darkness, straining to hear over the roar of the waves and the frantic pounding of their own hearts. Little Ethan's cries softened into frightened whimpers, muffled against the thick fabric of Ethan's coat. Footsteps pounded past the cave entrance. Heavy breathing, frustrated curses carried on the wind. Their pursuers ran past, continuing down the main path. A collective, shaky sigh of relief escaped both Ethan and Clara. But the reprieve felt fragile, terrifyingly temporary. The men would quickly realize their quarry wasn't ahead of them. They would backtrack. They would search methodically. "What do we do now?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling in the echoing darkness. Her eyes were huge, reflecting the faint light filtering in from the cave mouth. Ethan's mind raced, assessing their rapidly dwindling options. Marcus Vance, Leonard Harrison, compromised security, professional killers on their trail, trapped in a cave with his injured lover and their terrified child. His satellite phone, he realized with a jolt, was back in a helicopter, useless. They were utterly alone, cut off. This Harrison, did Marcus ever say anything else about him? Anything specific? He asked, keeping his voice low. Clara shook her head, thinking hard. Only that he was obsessed with avenging his family's humiliation by your father. Marcus called him ruthless, patient, said he enjoyed playing the long game. And something about liking poetic justice. Using me, someone you loved, to hurt you. Marcus implied Harrison found that particularly satisfying. Poetic justice. The phrase chilled Ethan to the bone. It spoke of a deep, twisted pathology. This wasn't just business. It was personal, bordering on psychopathic. He cautiously peered out of the narrow cave entrance. The path above was empty for the moment, but he could hear distant shouts drifting back on the wind. They were turning back. He looked down. The tide was receding further, revealing a wider strip of treacherous, seaweed-slicked rocks and dark, wet sand at the base of the cliff. Down, he decided quickly. We have to risk going down to the beach. Follow the base of the cliff back towards Oakhaven. It's our only chance. It was incredibly dangerous. The rocks looked sharp, slippery. The footing would be treacherous. They'd be exposed to anyone looking down from the cliff path. But staying put was certain death. Okay, Clara agreed instantly, her fears seemingly overridden by a surge of adrenaline and maternal determination. Yes. Okay. Give me Ethan first. Ethan instructed, already easing himself carefully out of the cave mouth. He scanned the path above again. Still clear, but the shouts were closer. He rapidly assessed the drop, 10, maybe 12 feet on a jagged, uneven rocks below. He found precarious handholds and footholds in the rock face, testing each deliberately before committing his weight. He lowered himself steadily, landing with a jarring impact on the slick rocks, stumbling but managing to keep his feet under him. The cold spray of the sea hit his face. All right, pass him down. Carefully, he called up softly, positioning himself directly below the opening, arms outstretched. Clara leaned out, her face a pale oval in the gloom. With infinite care, her hands shaking slightly, she lowered their son towards him. Ethan securely grasped the boy's small body, pulling him safely down into his embrace. Little Ethan, startled but silent now, just stared up at his father's face with wide, solemn gray eyes, his small hand instinctively clutching Ethan's coat. That trusting gaze, that absolute dependence, hit Ethan with the force of a revelation. This was what mattered. Nothing else. Now you, Clara. Take your time. Watch your footing. Clara took a steadying breath and began her descent. She moved awkwardly, hampered by her injured ankle and the slickness of the rock. Halfway down, her supporting foot slipped on a patch of wet seaweed. She cried out, a choked gasp of terror, as she lost her grip, dangling precariously by one hand. Ethan reacted instantly, surging upwards, grabbing her wrist in a vice-like grip just as her fingers slipped. I've got you. Let go. Trust me. She whimpered, squeezed her eyes shut, and let go. She fell the last few feet, landing heavily against his chest. He absorbed the impact, grunting as they both staggered on the unstable rocks, but miraculously stayed upright. For a breathless moment, they clung together, Ethan holding his son in one arm, Clara pressed against him, trembling uncontrollably. The shared terror, the physical contact, forged a connection stronger than words. Up there, a shout from above shattered the moment. Clara gasped, pointing upwards. The two men were back at the cliff edge directly above the cave, peering down, spotting them immediately against the contrasting darkness of the wet rocks. There they are. Get down there. Run, Ethan yelled, grabbing Clara's free hand, pulling her into a stumbling, desperate run along the narrow strip of beach revealed by the receding tide. They scrambled over sharp, barnacle-encrusted rocks, splashed through icy tidal pools, their only thought to put distance between themselves and their pursuers, heading towards the faint, distant glimmer of lights that marked Oak Haven. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed above the roar of the waves, followed by the ping of a bullet ricocheting violently off a rock just inches from Ethan's head. Stone fragments sprayed his cheek. They were shooting. Ruthlessly. Down. Get down. Ethan shoved Clara forcefully behind a large, jagged boulder that offered partial cover, crouching low himself, instinctively shielding little Ethan with his own body. The shooting stopped momentarily. Were they reloading? Or simply taking careful aim? He risked a peek around the edge of the boulder. The men weren't attempting to climb down where he and Clara had. Instead, they were moving further along the cliff-top path, looking for an easier, faster descent point. They had maybe 5 or 10 minutes at best. My phone, Clara suddenly cried out in dismay, frantically patting the pockets of her jeans. Oh God, Ethan, I must have dropped it. Back there when I fell. Or near the cave. Ethan cursed under his breath. Their one slim chance of calling for help was gone, lying somewhere on the dark rocks behind them. They were completely isolated, hunted. We keep moving, he said, his voice tight with grim determination. Stay low, boulder to boulder. Don't give them a clear shot. They continued their desperate flight, a painful, staggering scramble from one meager point of cover to the next. The base of the cliff offered a chaotic obstacle course of sharp rocks, deep pools, and slippery seaweed. Clara was limping heavily now, leaning almost all her weight on Ethan, her face contorted in pain. Little Ethan had started crying again, his thin wails a heartbreaking counterpoint to the crashing waves and the howling wind. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant seabird cry sounded like a gunshot. Ethan felt his own strength beginning to ebb, the strain of carrying his son, supporting Clara, and navigating the treacherous terrain taking its toll. Doubt began to creep in. Could they make it? Just as despair threatened to engulf him, he saw it. Tucked into a small, sheltered cove ahead, almost hidden by an overhang of the cliff, was a structure. A dilapidated wooden boathouse, its timbers grayed and warped by decades of salt and storms, but seemingly intact. And impossibly, miraculously, a thin ribbon of smoke curled from a rusted tin chimney pipe, barely visible against the bruised twilight sky. Someone was inside. Hope, fragile but fiercely potent, surged through Ethan's exhausted body. Clara, look, he gasped, pointing with his chin, unable to spare a hand. The boathouse. There's smoke. Someone's there. The sight seemed to galvanize Clara, too. Ignoring her throbbing ankle, she pushed forward with renewed urgency. They stumbled the last 50 yards, collapsing against the rough wooden wall of the boathouse, gasping for breath. As they leaned there, tried to recover, the sturdy wooden door creaked open. A figure filled the doorway. An old man, sinewy and tough, his face a road map of wrinkles carved by sun and sea, his eyes sharp and assessing beneath bushy white eyebrows. He held a steaming enamel mug in one hand and surveyed their bedraggled state. Ethan's expensive but torn coat, Clara's obvious injury and terrified pallor, the crying child with an unnerving stillness. "Trouble?" the old man asked eventually, his voice raspy, like ropes pulled over weathered wood. "Please," Ethan panted, struggling for breath, forcing the words out. "Help us. Men after us. Armed. Trying to kill us." The old man's shrewd gaze flickered past them, up towards the cliff path Ethan instinctively knew their pursuers must be navigating. He saw nothing in the gloom, but seemed to understand. He spat deliberately onto the dark sand at his feet. Business gone bad? Or something worse? Worse, Ethan confirmed grimly, meeting the old man's penetrating gaze. The fisherman studied Ethan's face intently, then Clara's, his eyes lingering for a moment on the whimpering child. He seemed to reach a decision. "Get inside, both of you. Quick now, before they make the beach." He stepped back, holding the door wide, ushering them into the surprisingly warm, cluttered interior. The air smelled strongly of brine, fish, wood smoke, and tar. Nets hung from the rafters, lobster pots were stacked in corners, and fishing gear lay scattered across workbench tops. A small pot-bellied stove glowed cherry red in one corner, radiating welcome heat. "Name's Silas," the old man grunted, sliding a heavy wooden bolt across the door, securing it firmly. "Keep low and stay quiet. Let's see if your friends fancy knocking on Silas's door." They waited in the sudden, thick silence of the boathouse, the only sounds the crackle of the fire, the muffled roar of the waves outside, and little Ethan's sniffles as Clara rocked him gently, murmuring soft reassurances. Ethan positioned himself near a small, grimy window, peering out cautiously. After a few minutes that stretched like hours, the two pursuers appeared on the beach, moving quickly, scanning the rocks, their weapons held at the ready. They conferred briefly, then began moving systematically towards the boathouse, the only sign of potential refuge along this stretch of desolate coast. Silas, anticipating their approach, calmly picked up a well-maintained, double-barreled shotgun that was leaning against the wall near the stove. He broke it open, checked the shells with practiced, economical movements, and snapped it shut with a decisive click. "Expecting trouble often?" Ethan asked quietly, nodding towards the formidable weapon. Silas offered a short, dry chuckle. "Lived here 70 years, son. Learned long ago the sea ain't the only predator round these parts. Best be ready for whatever crawls ashore." He moved towards the door, motioning for Ethan and Clara to stay back, out of the line of sight. He waited, still as the rocks outside, until the footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Then, with startling speed, he flung the door open, standing squarely in the opening, the shotgun held casually but purposefully at hip level, its twin barrels pointed directly at the chest of the lead pursuer. "Evening," Silas growled, his voice suddenly hard as granite. "Looking for something?" The two men froze, visibly startled by the sudden appearance of the armed, defiant old fisherman. They exchanged quick, uncertain glances. They were clearly professionals, accustomed to intimidation, but the unwavering barrels of a 12-gauge at point-blank range tended to disrupt carefully laid plans. "We're looking for a man and a woman," the leader stammered, momentarily losing his composure. He recovered quickly, adopting a more authoritative tone. "They came this way, with a child. Have you seen them?" "Ain't seen a soul," Silas lied without blinking, his weathered face impassive, his solid frame completely blocking the doorway. "Just me, my supper brewing, and the tide coming in. Now, this here's private property. Unless you got official business with me, I suggest you be on your way." The men hesitated, clearly weighing their options. One subtly tried to crane his neck, peering past Silas into the shadowy interior of the boathouse. Silas shifted the shotgun almost imperceptibly, a tiny movement that spoke volumes. "Tide waits for no man," Silas added, his voice dropping into a low, menacing growl. "And neither do I. Move along." Now, there was another tense pause. Ethan held his breath, every muscle coiled. He could see the calculation in the lead gunman's eyes. Their orders were likely precise: eliminate Thorne and Du Bois. But encountering armed resistance from a seemingly uninvolved local complicated things significantly. A firefight would attract unwanted attention. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the leader made his decision. He gave Silas a long, hard glare, then nodded curtly to his partner. "Let's check further down the coast." They must have kept going. They backed away slowly, guns still half raised, then turned and jogged off down the beach, disappearing into the deepening gloom. Silas watched them go, his expression unreadable, until they were completely out of sight. Only then did he lower the shotgun, letting out a long, slow breath. He closed the door, slid the bolt back into place, and turned to face Ethan and Clara, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Right then. Seems you weren't exaggerating the worst part. Folk like that ain't collecting parking tickets." He nodded towards a sturdy wooden bench near the stove. "Sit yourselves. Warm up. You owe me the story." Relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over Ethan, making his legs tremble. He guided Clara to the bench, sinking down beside her. "We owe you our lives," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. He quickly explained who they were, the basics of the betrayal by Marcus Vance, the frame-up of Clara, the discovery of his son, and the belief that Leonard Harrison was the vengeful mastermind behind it all. Silas listened intently, occasionally nodding, his expression thoughtful. "Thorne Industries," he mused, stroking his bristly chin. "Heard the name. Big city trouble following you all the way out here." He looked at Clara, then at the sleeping child nestled against her, his gaze softening slightly. "Takes grit, lass. Living like that, protecting the wee one." He walked over to a cluttered shelf and pulled down an old, battered radio transmitter, flicking switches and tapping gauges. "Cell phones are useless down in this cove. Signals can't penetrate the cliffs. But this old girl," he patted the radio casing, "sometimes, if the atmospheric conditions are just right, she can reach the Coast Guard station up past Seal Point." While Silas patiently coaxed the ancient radio to life, fiddling with dials and antenna wires, Ethan turned his full attention to Clara. He gently examined her ankle, which was visibly swollen and already bruising. He took the damp cloth Silas offered and carefully wrapped it around the injury. "How bad is it?" he asked softly. "It hurts," she admitted, leaning her head wearily against his shoulder. "But I'll manage." "Ethan, what happens now? Even if we get away tonight? Marcus Vance, Harrison, they won't stop looking." "I know," Ethan said, his voice hardening with resolve. He met her gaze, his gray eyes intense. "But they're not the only ones with resources. Marcus Vance will answer for what he's done, and I will expose Leonard Harrison. I will dismantle everything he's built. No one threatens my family." He looked down at their sleeping son, his heart contracting with fierce love, then back at Clara. "Our family." A fragile, watery smile touched Clara's lips, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her that day. "I've waited 2 years to hear you say that," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Static crackle. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Oakhaven Boathouse, Gull Cove. Do you read? Over." Silas's voice, amplified slightly by the radio, cut through the quiet intimacy of the moment. They held their breath, listening intently to the hiss and crackle. More static, then, faint but discernible, a calm voice responded. "Oakhaven Boathouse, this is Coast Guard Station Seal Point, reading you faint but clear. Go ahead, over." Silas concisely relayed their situation. 2 adults, 1 infant, stranded, pursued by 2 unidentified armed males, requesting immediate police and Coast Guard assistance at his coordinates. He provided a description of the SUV and the pursuers. The voice crackled back, confirming the message received, promising immediate dispatch of air and ground units. ETA, approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Silas announced, setting down a microphone. He stoked the fire in the stove, adding another piece of driftwood. Just gotta hope your unpleasant acquaintances don't decide to double back for another look before help arrives. The ensuing wait was excruciating. Every gust of wind rattling the boathouse door sounded like intruders, every distant cry of a gull like a warning shout. Ethan kept watch of the grimy window, scanning the dark beach and the cliff top, while Clara cradled their son, humming a soft, wordless lullaby. The warmth of the fire, the relative safety of the boathouse, allowed the full weight of the past 2 years and the terrifying events of the last few hours to settle upon them. Ethan felt consumed by remorse for his blindness, his rage, his failure to see past his own pain to Clara's desperate sacrifice. He had allowed his trust issues, product of a demanding upbringing and the inherent ruthlessness of his world, to be expertly exploited by Marcus Vance, the man who should have been his staunchest protector. Vance would pay, and Harrison would learn what it truly meant to lose everything. Then, filtering through the sound of the wind and waves, came a new sound, the distant rhythmic whump 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 of helicopter rotors, growing steadily louder. Moments later, the intermittent wail of sirens drifted down from the clifftop road leading into Oak Haven. Flashing blue and red lights sliced through the darkness above. "About time," Silas grunted, peering out the window with satisfaction. "Coast Guard chopper coming in. Looks like the local constabulary decided to join the party too." Ethan watched, his arm protectively around Clara, as the powerful searchlight of the helicopter swept across the cove, illuminating the churning sea and the dark cliffs. It circled once, twice, then hovered expertly over the beach area near the boathouse, the downdraft whipping sand and spray into the air. Simultaneously, beams from powerful flashlights began to descend the cliff path. Police officers moving cautiously but quickly. Caught between the blinding spotlight from above and the approaching officers on the path, the two pursuers, who had apparently been lurking further down the beach, hesitated for only a second. Then, seemingly realizing the futility of their position, they turned and fled into the darkness along the base of the cliffs, away from the lights and the arriving cavalry. A figure rappelled swiftly down from the hovering helicopter, landing lightly on the sand. A Coast Guard rescue swimmer, geared up and moving purposefully towards the boathouse. Silas slid back the bolt and opened the door, stepping out to meet him. After a brief, urgent conversation, Silas waved Ethan and Clara out into the swirling wind and rotor wash. The Coast Guard officer, calm and professional despite the surrounding chaos, quickly assessed the situation. "Mr. Thorne? Ma'am? We need to get you and the child airlifted out immediately for medical evaluation and safety. There's a secure location prepared. We can take full statements once you're clear of the area." As the rescue basket was lowered from the helicopter, swaying in the downdraft, Ethan turned to Silas, extending his hand. "Silas, there aren't words to thank you enough." The old fisherman gripped Ethan's hand firmly, his own calloused and strong. "Just glad this old shack could offer safe harbor. You look after that little fella." He nodded towards the sleeping child and the lass. A rare twinkle sparked in his shrewd eyes. "And maybe think about sending an old man a new marine radio. This one's seen better decades." Ethan felt a genuine smile spread across his face, the first unguarded smile in years. "Consider done, Silas. Top of the line. And anything else, anything you ever need, you call me." Clara added her own tearful, heartfelt thanks before Ethan helped her carefully into the swaying basket, ensuring she was secure. He climbed in beside her, cradling their son tightly against his chest, shielding him from the noise and wind. As they were winched upwards, the boathouse shrinking below them, the flashing lights receding, Ethan looked down at Clara. Her face was turned up towards his, pale and streaked with grime and tears, but her eyes held a mixture of profound relief, exhaustion, and a dawning, fragile hope. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this ordeal was the beginning, not the end. Marcus Vance, Leonard Harrison, the conspiracy that had shattered their lives, the reckoning was yet to come. But as the helicopter banked, carrying them away from the treacherous coast, towards safety and an unknown future, he felt something fundamental shift within him. He had found her. He had found his son. He had found the truth. And whatever battles lay ahead, they would fight them together. The ice around his heart had finally, irrevocably, begun to melt. The aftermath was swift and decisive, orchestrated with the full weight of Ethan Thorne's considerable resources and influence, now fueled by righteous fury. Landing at a secure private airfield, they were met not by Ethan's potentially compromised regular security detail, but by a hand-picked team of elite operatives loyal only to him, supplemented by high-level state police investigators alerted through discreet back channels. Marcus Cole, Ethan's current head of security, was immediately detained for questioning, his communications and financials placed under intense scrutiny. Simultaneously, acting on the information Clara had provided and Ethan's immediate authorization, a separate team moved on Marcus Vance. They found him not at his home, but at a private airport, attempting to board a charter jet to a non-extradition country, his escape plan clearly accelerated by Ethan's unexpected trip to Oakhaven. Cornered and confronted with Ethan's knowledge of his treachery, Vance initially blustered, then crumbled. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Clara's testimony, corroborating financial trails uncovered by Ethan's forensic accountants, and the recovered and damning communications from his old tablet which Clara had told them about, Vance confessed. He laid out the entire conspiracy, confirming every detail of Clara's story. His recruitment by Leonard Harrison, driven by greed and resentment over perceived slights from Ethan's father. The meticulous planning involved in framing Clara. The manipulation of Julian Vance. The constant surveillance and threats against Clara to ensure her silence. And finally, the panicked order from Harrison to eliminate Ethan and Clara once it became clear Ethan was close to the truth. Vance also implicated Marcus Cole, revealing Cole had been recruited months earlier as an insurance policy, feeding Vance information about Ethan's movements and security protocols, including the discovery of Clara in Oakhaven, designed to lure Ethan into the trap. Leonard Harrison proved more difficult. Protected by layers of wealth, legal firewalls, and plausible deniability, he initially weathered the storm. But Vance's detailed confession, combined with evidence unearthed by Ethan's relentless investigators linking Harrison's offshore accounts to the payments made to Vance and the hit team, began to tighten the net. The final blow came from an unexpected source, Julian Vance. Facing financial ruin and potential charges as an accessory, Julian provided investigators with recordings of coded conversations he'd had with Harrison, discussing the Clara problem and the need for a permanent solution. It was enough. Leonard Harrison, the architect of the long vendetta, was arrested in his palatial estate, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. While the legal battles raged, Ethan and Clara began the slow, difficult process of rebuilding their lives. The penthouse, once a symbol of Ethan's success, now felt cold and tainted by memories of his isolation and anger. They moved, temporarily at first, to a secluded country estate owned by Thorne Industries, a place with green lawns, warm sunlight, and space for a child to run. There, surrounded by loyal security and shielded from the intense media storm that erupted around Harrison's arrest, they began to talk. Really talk. There were tears, apologies, moments of raw pain as they revisited the misunderstandings and hurt of the past 2 years. Ethan wrestled with profound guilt over his lack of trust, his willingness to believe the worst, while Clara grappled with the trauma of her exile and the constant fear she had endured. But beneath the pain, the deep, abiding love they had shared remained. It manifested in quiet moments. Ethan patiently helping Clara with physical therapy for her injured ankle. Clara gently coaxing Ethan to talk about the pressures of his world, something he'd rarely done before. Both of them marveling at the simple, unadulterated joy of watching their son explore his new, safe world. Little Ethan, initially shy and overwhelmed, quickly blossomed under the warmth of his father's unexpected presence. He learned the joy of being swung high in the air, the comfort of falling asleep against his father's broad chest, the delight of having two parents devoted to his every smile. His infectious giggles became the soundtrack to their healing. Slowly, tentatively, trust was rebuilt, brick by painful brick. They learned to navigate the spaces between them, acknowledging the scars but refusing to let them define their future. Ethan, humbled and profoundly changed by the ordeal, began to reevaluate his priorities. The ruthless drive for success hadn't disappeared, but it was tempered now by a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. He delegated more, spent less time chained to his desk, and discovered the simple pleasure of building sandcastles or reading bedtime stories. Clara, shedding the layers of fear and isolation, rediscovered her own strength and resilience, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had protected her family against impossible odds. She began tentatively sketching again, rediscovering her passion for art history, finding solace and expression in creativity. They decided against returning to the city penthouse, choosing instead to make the country estate their permanent home. It became a sanctuary, a place filled not with ghosts and regrets, but with the vibrant, messy reality of family life. They were not the same people they were 2 years ago. The naive intensity of their early romance had been replaced by something deeper, quieter, more resilient, a love tested by fire and forged in the crucible of betrayal, fear, and ultimate forgiveness. Ethan Thorne had thought she betrayed him, a belief that had nearly destroyed him. But finding a baby with his name at her side hadn't just unraveled a sinister conspiracy. It had unraveled him, stripping away layers of pride and pain to reveal the man he was meant to be. A partner, a father, a man finally capable of recognizing the immeasurable value of trust and love. The road ahead was still being paved, but for the first time in a long time, it stretched out before them bright with possibility, and they walked it together, hand in hand, with their son's laughter lighting the way. Thank you so much for joining us for this extended story. We truly hope you were captivated by Ethan and Clara's journey through betrayal, danger, and reunion. If you enjoyed this narrative and want to hear more thrilling and emotional stories, please show your support by hitting that like button and, most importantly, subscribing to the channel. Every subscription helps us bring more tales like this to you. We appreciate you listening, and we'll see you in the next story.